Thank you for joining us. Here's a look at some of the stories we're watching right now. The White House physician says President Biden's COVID symptoms are almost entirely gone. What we know about his revised schedule and when he might reemerge for public meetings. Plus, good news for millions of Americans who own a car. The average price of gas has dropped some 32 cents in the past couple of weeks, but it remains well over $4 a gallon for a majority of the country. And thousands of residents evacuate their homes in Northern California as the state battles its biggest wildfire this year. Why firefighters are struggling to contain this blaze. And later this hour, between claims of being a former FBI agent to recent admissions of fathering 2 additional children, former football star Herschel Walker's recent missteps are cause for concern among many Republicans who are hoping to win back Senator Raphael Warnock's seat in Georgia. Plus, Russia's state-controlled energy company announces a drastic cut to gas deliveries through its main pipeline to Europe. Why Moscow claims it's making this cut. But we begin tonight with President Biden's health as he continues to deal with the coronavirus. The president's physician said in a letter released today that the president's symptoms have, quote, almost completely resolved. White House COVID-19 response coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha spoke about President Biden and his condition this afternoon.
Once he has a negative test after day 5, he can end his isolation. CDC guidance suggests that he wear a mask when he's around others. The president's going to follow CDC guidance.
For more on this and the day's top political stories, let's bring in Steve Dorsey and Tyler Pager. Steve is a CBS News correspondent, and Tyler is White House reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome to you both. Tyler, I'll start with you. What have we learned about the president's health today, and about why we still have not heard directly from the president's personal doctor?
Yeah, it's great to be with you. And as we just heard there from the COVID-19 coordinator, Ashish Jha, the president continues to improve. He's seen his situation and his bout with COVID improve each day as he's been treated with Pavloxide, the antiviral pill there. And so I think we might see him as early as later this week. He's expected to head to Wilmington, Delaware this weekend, which would mark the end of his isolation, the longest period. Obviously, his first time with COVID that the American public has not seen him in person during his presidency. But as you hit on, there are questions continued from the reporters here at the White House about why we have not heard directly from Kevin O'Connor, who is the president's personal physician, the White House doctor here. And the administration continues to kind of deflect and say that they are being transparent. The press office has released a letter each day from Dr. O'Connor outlining the president's condition, but they haven't really given a clear answer about why the president's doctor himself has not appeared at the podium. Each day it's been Ashish Jha, who is responsible for the overall COVID response, but not the president's health.
Right. They've kind of talked around it and essentially implied that because the president has a mild case, we don't really need to hear from his personal doctor. At the same time, Steve, the White House has been working very hard to make it clear that President Biden is on the job, that he's working even though he's isolated. They are putting out photos. They're putting out videos. I think today, was the most unique one yet, where we got a picture of the president in his sunglasses out on a White House balcony on this green patio furniture with his dog at his side, his briefcase at his feet, and on the phone. A lot going on in that picture, sort of like a 007 goes to work or something. I'm not sure what they were trying to convey there, but regardless, they're trying to show that he is working. But what has had to be scuttled this week while he is still positive?
Yeah, Nancy, lots of travel has had to be scuttled. Not only this week, but last week. He was expecting to be in his hometown in the Scranton area in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to talk about his action to combat gun violence. Over the weekend, we expected him to be at home in Wilmington. Today, he was expecting to go to Florida and talk to a group of black law enforcement executives. He did that instead virtually, and he talked to reporters virtually today. and told them he's feeling fine, that his symptoms are improving, and that he's still hard at work. He's wrapping up his days a little earlier than anticipated, around 6:30 in the evenings, and he expects to be back at work in person at the White House by the end of the week, he told reporters.
Always so hard to know, however, when you're going to start testing negative again. You mentioned that speech he gave remotely to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives in Florida. And in that speech, he did have a very pointed message for politicians who claim to support the police but then don't walk the walk. And he was talking directly about his predecessor, former President Trump, on January 6th. Take a listen.
And for 3 hours, the defeated former president of the United States watched it all happen as he sat in the comfort of the private dining room next to the Oval Office. While he was doing that, brave law enforcement officers were subject to the medieval hell for 3 hours.
Medieval hell. Tyler, what's the significance behind those comments?
Yeah, I think that, we're seeing a new, more aggressive line from the president there. The issue of policing and crime has been a touchstone in our politics. Republicans have repeatedly tried to paint the Biden administration as soft on crime, trying to tie the president to calls from some of the more progressive members of his party who have said, calls like defund the police and reduce the amount of police, take away funding from them to redirect to other resources. And you hear there the president not only repudiating that sort of line of attack, but also making very clear that he does not see a party like the Republican Party, which has, for many of them, stood by former President Donald Trump's support of the insurrection on January 6th as being compatible with a party that also supports the police. And I think that is the sort of distinction he's trying to make and trying to cut at their argument that they are both a party that supports the police but also supports the insurrection. Obviously, what happened on January 6th, there were many police officers, as he outlined there, that were in the line of duty, injured, killed, later took their own lives. And the president there is trying to rebut that argument, going on offense. The Democrats are often on defense when it comes to being painted as soft on crime and not supportive of the police. And I think this is a new line, more aggressive line we saw from the president that I think we can expect to see, particularly from other Democrats, but also from the president as he heads out onto the campaign trail ahead of November's midterm elections.
Especially since there are some officers who are still recovering from injuries they received on January 6th. I want to switch gears and talk about the economy now. And Steve, there's this new study from UMass Boston that shows that more than half of all older American women who live alone don't have enough income to afford essential expenses. Now, there's a series of economic reports coming out this week, starting tomorrow, and the White House is already arguing that no matter what those reports show, the U.S. is not in a recession. So take us behind the messaging, Steve, here.
Well, yeah, that's a very tight rope to walk with the White House and the president even telling reporters today, Nancy, that he doesn't see a recession. That's not what analysts at many big banks, at economists are seeing. It's hard to know for certain whether or not we're in a recession currently. That there's a bit of a lag, obviously. But even Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, dismissed concerns about a recession, painting it as shifting economic landscapes right now, and that there are challenges on the horizon, but she was not gloomy at all about the economic present for this country. There's a number of economic data indicators we're going to get this week, including consumer confidence, including indications from the Fed, how strong they think the economy could be right now, with a potential another large rate increase in interest rates midweek. And this is all going to combine with soon another report on inflation to indicate how bad inflation has been in this country. It's over 9%, according to the most recent report for June. Perhaps it could get worse if the Fed's interest rate hikes haven't had the effect that they hoped. But that's really what is concerning the White House. Job numbers are good right now. However, inflation's been stubborn, and if they don't control it soon, Nancy, we know it could have an effect on the midterm elections as well.
Right, and that's why the White House, one of the reasons the White House is watching this so closely. Tyler, I want to ask you about something that happened to you on this most recent trip with President Biden in the Middle East. You and another Washington Post reporter were initially excluded from an official Saudi briefing. Walk us through exactly what happened from your perspective and why you think that you were shut out.
Yeah, Nancy, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. As you just mentioned, the president returned from a trip to the Middle East, his first there as president, where he went to Israel and then Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi Arabia stop was quite controversial, given the meeting he had with the Crown Prince, known as MBS, in large part because U.S. intelligence officials have concluded that MBS ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, who was an outspoken critic of Saudi Arabia, but also a contributing columnist for the Washington Post, where I work. Biden, as a candidate, vowed to make Saudi Arabia a pariah and said he did not find much redeeming qualities in the current government of Saudi Arabia, which remains today. And so as one of the reporters traveling with the president covering his trip there, was with the rest of the press in the press file, the room where all the journalists sit and watch on TV what the president is doing and work from there. And someone who works for the Saudi government as a press aide was inviting reporters to attend a briefing with a top Saudi official after Biden's meeting with MBS to give the Saudi version of the meeting. When I was initially told by another reporter that she was looking for me as the Washington Post reporter on the ground there to invite me to the briefing. When I was then introduced to her, she said that she could not engage with me, that the Post was not allowed to attend the briefing. When we followed up and asked why, she was unable to provide a reason and said, quote, "Don't kill me, I'm just the messenger." Striking words given obviously what happened to my colleague Jamal Khashoggi, according to U.S. intelligence, at the hands of Saudi Arabia officials. We then went to the White House for comment. Obviously, they were trying to make it clear that they were putting human rights on the agenda. The White House was quite concerned about that. We don't exactly know what happened, but many hours later, just before the briefing, we were then extended an invite to attend. I'm not going to prescribe any motives to this incident, but obviously a striking case given how the Washington Post and Khashoggi were so much overshadowing this trip, and a core part of why there was controversy about Biden's visit and his encounter, that fist bump with MBS.
Well, I'm glad that you pressed the case, you and your colleagues, and that the Saudis did eventually relent. Very important to have the Washington Post there in that briefing. Tyler Pager, Steve Dorsey, thank you so much for being here today. West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has tested positive for COVID-19. In a tweet, Senator Manchin said he is fully vaccinated and boosted and is experiencing mild symptoms. The 74-year-old is isolating and working remotely. The Senate, though, is expected to vote on a semiconductor production bill this week, and Manchin would not be allowed to vote remotely. That bill aims to boost production of critical computer chips, a shortage of which is driving up the cost of vehicles across the nation. After a weekend of record-high temperatures, millions of Americans remain under excessive heat warnings and advisories. Dan Lieberman has more on when things may finally cool down.
As a dangerous heat wave weighs down the country from coast to coast,
you gotta do what you gotta do.
The music hasn't stopped in Times Square.
Nobody assumes, oh, it's so warm, this is your weather, but I mean, it's hot.
Robert Burke, better known as the Naked Cowboy, performed for tourists and New Yorkers alike in the 90-degree heat.
And I tease people all day. They're like, boy, you're dressed for the weather. I'm like, yes, sometimes it actually makes sense.
Many cities, including Boston, saw record-breaking temperatures hitting triple digits, and at least 2 heat-related deaths were reported. This recharge station here in Times Square has been handing out waters to some of the most vulnerable New Yorkers and directing people to cooling stations. As temperatures rose in Kentucky, brother Thomas Caudill hit the streets of Lexington in his van. handing out snacks and cold beverages.
When we go out, I look at them as my family, my brother and sister, so it's tough.
Experts warn climate change means extreme weather events, including heat waves, will only become more frequent.
The headlines are going to be filled with heat wave news every summer, and they are going to get worse.
And relief is in sight this week for much of the Northeast, but forecasters say people in the Pacific Northwest should brace for intense heat. Dan Lieberman, CBS News, New York.
The January 6th committee is considering another high-profile subpoena if necessary. Why the panel wants to talk to the wife of a Supreme Court justice. We'll talk to a former committee investigator about where the investigation into the deadly Capitol riot stands. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse?
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
A former investigator on the January 6th committee is making a late bid for an open Senate seat in Missouri. John Wood is looking to win the seat of retiring Republican Senator Roy Blunt. He's running as an independent and recently gathered enough signatures to get on the ballot before next week's deadline. For more on this, John Wood joins us now. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. I'm glad to be with you.
So why did you decide to jump into this Senate race at this late date, and what led you to believe that there's an opening for an independent candidate in a red state like Missouri?
Yeah, so I'm a Republican. I've been a Republican my entire life. I'm a conservative, but a common sense conservative within the mainstream. And I looked at this race and was very distraught that it looks like the voters in Missouri are going to be presented with a choice between two extremes, the extreme left from the Democrats and the extreme right, and not just conservative, but divisive and extremist on the right. And it could be even our disgraced former governor, Eric Greitens. And I decided that we need an option that really represents the views and values of Missouri voters, which is conservative, but within the mainstream.
People have tried to run and win as independents before. Typically, it is a real uphill battle. Why not just run as a Republican? Is it because you've already got, I think it is 21 people running in that field, including Eric Greitens, who, as you mentioned, is facing abuse and sexual misconduct allegations?
Yeah, that race has become really a race to the bottom, unfortunately, to see who can be the most extreme and the most divisive. And so far, it looks like Eric Greitens is winning that race. And he resigned as governor because of a scandal in which he blackmailed his mistress with naked photos, and then since has been credibly accused by his ex-wife of domestic abuse. And I just decided that wasn't the game I want to play, the race in really both parties' primaries have been to see who can be the most extreme and appeal to a very small sliver of their respective bases. But what most Missourians want is somebody who's in the mainstream, a right-of-center candidate who is in the mainstream, and that's what I am.
Let's talk about what was your day job until recently on the January 6th committee. In the hearing last week, they highlighted the fact that your would-be Missouri Senate colleague, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, riled up the crowd on January 6th with that infamous raised fist, but later ran for safety like all of his other colleagues. Take a listen.
He raised his fist in solidarity with the protesters already amassing at the security gates. We spoke with a Capitol Police officer who was out there at the time. She told us that Senator Hawley's gesture riled up the crowd, and it bothered her greatly because he was doing it in a safe space, protected by the officers and the barriers.
So what were your thoughts on the evidence presented about Hawley and the fallout afterwards?
Yeah, I know the internet's having a lot of fun at Senator Hawley's expense, and there are a lot of jokes out there about it. But the fact that he was running actually demonstrated just how serious the threat was. During that same hearing, you heard the really shocking testimony that Secret Service agents were asking to make calls to their loved ones for fear that they would never see them again. So, obviously I disagree strongly with Senator Hawley on his views of the 2020 election and what happened on January 6th. But to see him and his colleagues there running really just shows that there was a real threat, and we need to make sure that this never happens again. And the threat wasn't just to the lives and safety of the people in the building, the people who are guarding the building, but the threat was also to our democracy. And we need to get back to having a consensus in favor of our Constitution and our democracy. And part of living in a democracy means accepting the results of the election, even if your party doesn't win.
And yet, despite the seriousness of the situation, as you just described, Senator Hawley doubled down last week. He posted a picture of a mug with his raised fist on it and urged people to buy it. You obviously feel that January 6th was a destructive moment, or you wouldn't have taken a job investigating it. Why do you think he doesn't share that view?
Well, unfortunately, it seems like politicians are trying to raise money by being as extreme and divisive as they possibly can be, because they're trying to appeal to a very small sliver of their party's base. So that gets back to my point earlier about why, even though I'm a lifelong Republican and continue to be a conservative Republican, I'm running as an independent because I don't want to play that game where we have to appeal to a small sliver of our base. I want to appeal to the vast majority of Missourians who are within the mainstream.
I know you've already picked up the support of one former Missouri Senator, Jack Danforth. Walk us through how, as an independent, you plan to approach this race over the next few months, how an independent can win in a state like Missouri. I know you've described why you should win, but give us give us the logistics of winning as an independent.
Yes, so I've already collected enough signatures to get on the ballot in November. We'll be submitting those signatures to the Secretary of State in Jefferson City on Thursday. And then we'll be on the ballot in November. And I think that while there's not a lot of precedent for independent candidates to be able to win in general elections, this is a unique circumstance where we're going to have the most extreme and the most divisive from both parties. And then I'm very fortunate that Senator Danforth is supporting me, and he's started a super PAC, which he says will be well-funded, that will support me. And so I think that I'm going to be able to get the message out to Missouri voters. And that's really all it takes, because the message, once it gets out to people, will really resonate, because most Missouri voters are in the mainstream. On the whole, they're right of center, but they're in the mainstream. And I think they're going to reject the extremes that they're getting from the two major parties.
Well, it'll be really interesting to watch, an interesting test case. John Wood, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Former President Trump's White House chief of staff says he believes the testimony of top Trump officials at the January 6th committee hearings. Mick Mulvaney, who now is a CBS News contributor, told Major Garrett on the Takeout why the nation should take those witnesses seriously.
there's so much about the structure of this that is wrong that it sort of violates my sense of propriety. But at the same time, when Bill Barr puts his hand on a Bible and says, we looked at all the allegations about the 2020 election and we didn't find anything of merit, I believe that.
Mulvaney also said that the testimony of former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson was a, quote, game changer. Vice President Kamala Harris met with leaders in Indianapolis today to discuss reproductive rights. She made the trip as Indiana became the first state holding a special session to consider a near-total abortion ban following the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade.
One does not have to abandon your faith or your beliefs to agree that the government should not be making this decision for her. An individual should be able to choose based on their personal beliefs and the dictates of their faith, but the government should not be telling an individual what to do, especially as it relates to one of the most intimate and personal decisions a woman could make.
State Republicans proposed the bill last week. It aims to ban all abortion in Indiana, except if the mother's life is in danger or if the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. The special session to discuss the legislation could last several weeks. After dueling events in Arizona, former President Trump and former Vice President Pence will both deliver high-profile speeches in Washington, D.C. What Pence is expected to say about his vision for conservatives ahead of Mr. Trump's return to the nation's capital for the first time since he left office. Plus, Russia deals a blow to European countries, saying it will further cut gas supplies through its gas link to Germany. How Moscow is justifying this move and the timeline for when grain exports from Ukraine could potentially resume. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell them I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Nancy Cordes, and here's a look at some of our top stories. Congress is working to pass legislation aimed at boosting microchip production and to lower drug costs. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are working to get it all done ahead of the month-long August recess. Plus, the World Health Organization says monkeypox is now an international health emergency. More than 16,000 new cases have been reported globally, with roughly 2,900 here in the U.S. The Biden administration has not yet declared the virus a public health emergency. And President Biden's doctor says his COVID symptoms are nearly gone after he tested positive for the virus last Thursday. The administration's COVID response chief says the president contracted the highly transmissible BA.5 Omicron subvariant. Deborah Alfarone has more from Washington.
President Biden tweeted this picture of himself taking phone calls from a White House balcony. This is day 4 of his isolation since testing positive for COVID-19.
Hi, Mr. President.
The president also attended 2 virtual events, including a meeting with CEOs and labor leaders.
I'm feeling great. You know, I've had 2 full nights of sleep all the way through. Matter of fact, My dog had to wake me up this morning.
In his most recent letter, the president's physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, said his symptoms have almost completely resolved with some nasal congestion and minimal hoarseness. He also adds that the president's vital signs are normal and his lungs are clear with no shortness of breath. Administration officials say President Biden contracted the highly contagious BA.5 subvariant. His physician said the president is conscientious of trying to protect White House staffers and Secret Service agents whose jobs actually require them to be near him.
Well, I hope I'm back to work in person by the end of this week.
Once he has a negative test after day 5, he can end his isolation. CDC guidance suggests that he wear a mask when he's around others.
Federal health officials say the BA.5 subvariant has helped drive the recent uptick in COVID-19 cases. Several major U.S. cities, like Los Angeles, are once again considering whether or not to reinstate indoor mask mandates as soon as this week. In the meantime, the CDC continues to recommend all Americans who live in areas of high transmission to mask up indoors, particularly around crowds. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
Former President Donald Trump and former Vice President Mike Pence held rallies in Arizona on Friday to support different GOP candidates for the state's gubernatorial primary in 9 days. Mr. Trump is supporting Kari Lake, a former local news anchor who continues to spread the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. Mr. Pence, meanwhile, is supporting Karen Taylor Robson, calling her the, quote, clear conservative choice. The former VP has not made any mention of the 2020 election in either of his Arizona campaign stops. For more on this, CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins me now. Hi, Finn. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Nancy.
So, Finn, the former vice president was supposed to give a speech at the Heritage Foundation here in D.C. tonight, but bad weather diverted his aircraft and postponed things. What do we know about what he does plan to say to this conservative think tank when he does make the speech?
Yeah, Nancy, sources close to Pence tell me that Pence was going to lay out a domestic policy agenda that was going to focus on the future of the party instead of, quote, being consumed by yesterday's grievances, which seems to be a reference to his former boss and former president, Donald Trump, who was giving his own domestic policy speech focused on crime and other issues tomorrow at the America First Policy Summit here in D.C., which will be the first time he's back in D.C. since he left office. Though Pence's speech today was canceled, he's giving another one tomorrow at the Young America's Foundation conference in D.C. as well. But he's looking more to separate and differentiate himself from his former boss on policy and on other issues like candidates in Arizona.
You know, there's a good reason why he wants to put the past behind him. It's because his security has been at the center of a good deal of the January 6th hearings. Right. And obviously there is a large segment of the Republican base that still supports President Trump, still angry at the fact that he did not go along with plans to stop the lawful counting of the 2020 presidential electors. So how does he get past that? What is his constituency at this point as he looks to mount a bid for 2024?
Nancy, you're absolutely right. If you look at Pence and you look at that 30% obstacle that he has, 30% of the base that is staunchly in support of Donald Trump, it will be difficult to get past that if he does announce a presidential bid. And you see people like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is polling higher than he is at this stage in the game. However, if you recall, he does have some ties with the evangelical vote that's really important during the presidential primary in Iowa and other states like that, South Carolina, which he was just in last week. Also, some of the people that I've spoken to who are close to Pence say that, you know, one of the benefits of the January 6th hearing is that he's come out looking presidential. He was the one who called for reinforcements of the Capitol. He was the one who stood his ground that day and did not leave and finished his constitutional duty of certifying the vote on January 6, 2021.
Right, good point. In contrast to his boss, the president, who was, we now know, sitting in the dining room and not doing anything. There was an unusual split-screen situation in Arizona this weekend when both President Trump and former Vice President Pence were both doing events in the state. And Mr. Trump really talked a lot about the January 6th committee. What did he say?
He went, when he was campaigning for Kari Lake, his gubernatorial candidate that he endorsed, and is in a tight race against Karen Taylor Robeson there in the Grand Canyon State, Trump unleashed a verbal assault against the January 6th committee hearings that he's called the kangaroo court, a political witch hunt. He also went after witnesses who testified during those hearings, including Republican Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers, who fought against Trump's attempts to overturn the election. And he has felt the punitive backlash of that support, or for countering Trump and not giving in to Trump's demands. During this primary, during the event in Arizona, Trump went after Bowers, and he also propped up David Farnsworth, Bowers' opponent in that race. And it looks like at this stage that Bowers could lose, even though he's a traditional Republican, and solely because of he's now facing the ire of Trump and his supporters in Arizona.
Yet another case where President Trump appears to have put a personal grievance ahead of what might be in the best interest of his party. Before I let you go, Finn, I want to ask you about a disturbing moment at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit in Tampa this weekend. This is a conservative conference, and here's how Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz mocked female abortion advocates. Take a listen.
You watched these pro-abortion, pro-murder rallies? The people are just disgusting. Like, why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
Finn, how are these disgusting comments being received? How were they received there at the event and more broadly within the Republican Party? Or is this something that at this point they have just come to expect from Matt Gaetz?
Gaetz has been sharply criticized because of those comments by both sides made in Tampa over the weekend. During the audience there did applaud to a degree, but he has been sharply and vociferously and emphatically criticized for his comments. Abortion rights advocates also have called his remarks misogynistic. And they also point out that Gaetz is still under federal investigation for relations with an underage girl. So there's still a lot of backlash to his comments made in Tampa.
Good point. Finn Gomez, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy.
After repeated promises not to use fuel as a political weapon, Russia appears to be doing precisely that. Earlier today, the state-owned Gazprom announced they are dialing back natural gas shipments to just 20% of capacity. Though Europe has attempted to lessen its dependency on Russian oil and gas since the military assault on Ukraine started, they remain significantly reliant. And this announcement comes just days after Russia completed repairs on the pipeline and restarted gas flow at 40% capacity. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. David, thank you so much for being here. So how is Moscow justifying this decision to dial back gas exports?
Well, it says it has to do repairs on a turbine, which is part of this Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which provides the gas to Germany. And, of course, it blames the need for repairs on the economic sanctions which Europe, the United States, Canada, and a lot of the world have levied against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Germany's not buying that. The economy minister calls it a perfidious game, which is Putin trying to create uncertainty about energy supplies, which drives the price up and creates fears of a true crisis in the winter if Germany doesn't have enough fuel to heat its homes and to run its industries. So he is using gas and his position as the world's leading exporter of natural gas as a weapon to try to undermine European support for Ukraine in fighting against him. And he's doing it at very little cost because the rise in prices means he's actually making more money now, even though he is exporting less.
Right, and you touched on it. Obviously, the concern is that if people in Germany and other European countries can't heat their homes this winter, they will lose resolve for standing with Ukraine, and perhaps government officials will start to feel the same way. You know, the other big issue that everyone is talking about today is the fact that while late last week Russia and Ukraine reached this agreement to permit Ukraine's export of wheat in the middle of widespread food price spikes and supply disruptions, less than 24 hours later, Russia bombed a critical shipping port in Odessa. So at this point, is the deal still in effect?
Well, everybody says it's still in effect, but we should be clear what this deal is. It's not a ceasefire. This is a deal which, on paper at least, would allow 20 million tons of Ukrainian wheat and other grains to pass through the Black Sea. But the Black Sea is a war zone. And in case there was any doubt, Russia fired those missiles at Ukraine's principal Black Sea port, Odessa. So whether or not any of those ships carrying Ukrainian grain actually make it through the Black Sea safely remains to be seen. And it's when you look at the chances, it's hard not to think of all those agreements to establish humanitarian corridors for civilians to get out of cities like Mariupol, and those all fell through. So this is a long shot, but it's a shot that everybody has to take.
Right. Some would say this is sort of Putin's modus operandi, to make these agreements and then to sort of flagrantly violate them. And the reason this is of such incredible importance is because food insecurity around the world is on the rise without access to that grain from Ukraine. I want to switch gears and ask you about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's planned trip to Taiwan. She was told that the Pentagon doesn't think it's a good time for her to go. Why not?
Well, it's not a good time because, at least in the estimation of several branches of the Biden administration, it's right before the Chinese Communist Party Congress, and that is the moment at which President Xi needs to demonstrate that he is the master of the universe, and to send one of America's leading politicians. I mean, you're basically talking about the person who is second in line for the presidency and is arguably the most powerful politician in America, except the president, to send her or to allow her to go to Taiwan obviously creates the chances of an incident. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry has already said it will take, I think it's strong and forceful measures if Pelosi goes through with the trip. So if she does, that means the U.S. military will have to protect her, perhaps by flying escort for the plane that takes her to Taiwan to guard against it being harassed by Chinese jets. And that, of course, creates the opportunity for an incident. But, you know, Nancy, whether or not Pelosi goes in August, this is a long-term problem, which is just building. China is getting feistier and feistier about anything that smacks of support for Taiwan's independence, and it is developing more and more military capability to actually do something about it.
Such an interesting political situation because she's got the administration telling her not to go, but she's got a bipartisan group of lawmakers cheering her on and telling her she should go. David, finally, before we let you go, we've been reporting on the U.S. Army's recruitment problems. Explain to us how bad it actually is and what kinds of incentives the military is now looking at to try to boost their numbers.
Well, I spoke with the Chief of Staff of the Army on Friday, and he says they're going to miss their recruiting goal for 2022 by 10,000 recruits.
Wow.
The original goal was 60,000, so they're going to come up 10,000 short. The Army will figure out a way to offer some combination of bonuses, your choice of duty station, and all these incentives that it'll figure out a way to handle and deal with this short-term problem. But this is really a long-term problem for the United States. More than 3/4 of young people ages 17 to 24 do not qualify today for military service, either because of their weight or some other medical condition, a criminal record, or they simply do not pass the aptitude test that you have to take in order to get into the Army. Now, you can blame part of that on kids being out of school due to COVID. But if you look at the long-term trend, I mean, it is really striking. John F. Kennedy used to complain that only 50% of America's young people were eligible for military service, and now it is less than a quarter. Now, the Army is going to try a program where it has sort of prep camps, 90 days of trying to get young people into physical and mental shape that will then allow them to qualify to join the Army and go to boot camp. But the fact that the Army has to resort to something like that tells me that parents and schools are failing their children.
Yeah, I noticed that one of the things they're considering to try to boost recruitment is to peel back some of their tattoo rules so that you are able to join the force even if you've got more tattoos than are currently allowed. Creative solutions. All right, David Martin, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Herschel Walker's U.S. Senate campaign in Georgia has faced a string of controversies starting even before he entered the race last summer. How the football star turned GOP candidate is trying to reset his campaign strategy in one of his party's most pivotal races. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
The Republican Senate nominee in Georgia has made some false claims which have the candidate on the defensive in recent days. Former football star Herschel Walker is facing off against incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock, a Democrat. Walker previously criticized absentee fathers before admitting that he had 3 previously unacknowledged children of his own. And a recently resurfaced video shows the Trump-endorsed candidate falsely claiming to be a former FBI agent.
Work for the poor law enforcement. Y'all didn't know that either, did you? I spent time at Quantico at the FBI training schools. Y'all didn't know I was an agent. I probably shouldn't tell y'all that. Y'all don't care. But anyway, yeah, I've been in law enforcement
For more on this, Tia Mitchell joins us now. She's the Washington correspondent at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Hi, Tia. Thanks for being here.
Hi.
So walk us through what the fallout has been from this video where Walker falsely not only claims to be an FBI agent, but also says he considered shooting someone until I think a bumper sticker told him not to?
Yeah, so it's hard to know where to start. There are a lot of falsehoods that Herschel Walker has said throughout his campaign, resurfaced falsehoods from prior statements, like his statements about the FBI. He's talked about graduating with honors. He did not graduate from college. He left early to pursue his athletic career. A lot of falsehoods about his businesses and other interests. So in general, I would say they amount to the fact that voters can't necessarily depend on Herschel Walker being clear and honest and 100% truthful. He might be stretching the facts about different facets of his personal story. And we have seen that impact voters in Georgia. You know, this is still going to be a close race. Herschel Walker continues to have a lot of support, particularly among Republicans. But there are people who say they are troubled by the fact that they don't necessarily believe he is consistent or truthful at all times. And that matters to voters.
But at this point, he is the Republican nominee. So you've been reporting recently about a shift in strategy for the Walker campaign. What are they considering doing to minimize some of these missteps?
Yes, so the AJC has been reporting a lot about candidate Walker's campaign. New strategists were brought on. Others with the Republican Party that weren't necessarily engaged in his campaign have been brought on to try to steer the ship. They've come up with a new strategy. Before, they were really shielding Herschel Walker. He wasn't making a lot of public appearances. He was not talking to the media. They've taken the handcuffs off on him a little bit. He's ramped up his public schedule. They are allowing media more access to cover those comments. He still is doing mostly friendly media interviews, but he's a little bit more out there in the public than he was. Another thing is they're focusing more on, this is about Warnock. This is about Joe Biden and his low approval ratings. This is about the economy and trying to take the focus off of Herschel Walker's personal story and focus away from the consistencies around that personal story.
One of the most closely watched races in the country. And then switching gears, there's the Fulton County investigation into former President Trump's attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. There was a setback today, Tia, when a judge ruled that the district attorney cannot question a state senator who served as a fake elector for Mr. Trump. Why not?
Yes, so this goes back to a fundraiser that DA Fani Willis threw a couple of months ago that was in favor of Charlie Bailey. At the time, he was among several Democrats vying for the party's nomination for lieutenant governor. Charlie Bailey did win that primary, and now his opponent is Republican State Senator Burt Jones. And Burt Jones not only is his party's primary candidate for lieutenant governor, but as you mentioned, he's one of those fake electors who was the focus of the special grand jury's investigation. He was recently notified that he is a target of the investigation, meaning he could face charges, and he successfully has petitioned to have DA Willis removed from his case. He says it's a conflict of interest. She supports my political opponent, and she's also investigating me. The judge agreed. He said it just creates bad optics. And the judge says, I don't want anyone to say this investigation is politicized. And therefore, he has said the DA's office cannot question Senator Jones, cannot make determinations about whether he should be charged. There will be a new district attorney that is selected to do that. Right now, that only applies to Senator Jones, though. The other fake electors are still being investigated directly by Fulton County Special Grand Jury. They are being subpoenaed, and of course, other elected officials and Trump insiders are being subpoenaed as well.
Right, and I think there were at least a dozen other fake electors in Georgia, and this doesn't prohibit the DA from questioning them, right? So what exactly is the DA trying to determine at this point?
So it looks like the DA wants to know what were the conversations around this whole process, because we know Georgia's fake electors met in secret. They were directed to not even really be forthcoming with people about what they were doing on that day, where they signed paperwork that looked like they were real electors, knowing they were not, because again, Joe Biden had won the election, not Donald Trump. So there was a lot of secrecy. And I think what the district attorney and the special grand jury wants to know is, who were they talking to? Who told them to act in secret? Who said to do what? And again, the whole purpose is to determine, was this a greater conspiracy that went all the way to the top? Was this something that President Trump himself or some of his insiders like Rudy Giuliani that were directly directing what these fake electors should do? Does that amount to a crime being committed? Those are all things that the special grand jury is looking into.
Very interesting. Well, Tia Mitchell with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, thank you very much for getting us up to speed. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. You're streaming Red and Blue on CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Author and nonprofit executive Wes Moore has won Maryland's Democratic gubernatorial primary. His victory over the weekend pits him against Trump-backed Republican Dan Cox in November's election. Moore has denounced Cox's claims that the 2020 election was stolen from former President Trump. Maryland's Governor Larry Hogan says he will not support Cox as the Republican nominee and said Cox has no chance to win the race. If Moore wins, he will be Maryland's first black governor. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
Americans across the country react to the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion, understanding the landmark decision and its impact. For continuing coverage anywhere, stream on the free
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's take a look at the top stories we are following right now. A fast-moving wildfire burning near Yosemite has scorched more than 26 square miles in just 3 days. Thousands of people have been forced to evacuate, and crews are struggling to get the flames under control. We have more on efforts to contain the fire. President Biden's